I would like to touch upon on the issue of Chinese-Russian relations in security domain, and I'll try to explain why I think it's relevant for our region. Already before the war, I did some research on Russian and Chinese cooperation security domain, both in soft security domain as well as hard security domain. Why I did that? I did because my thesis was that it has impact on NATO, on its relevance, which is very important for our region. And my thesis was that NATO, in order to stay relevant on both sides of the Atlantic, needs to cope with existence of parallel two near-peer adversaries, regardless that one of them is not European one. Only then it will keep the relevance on the both sides of the Atlantic. And I will focus now on the, let's say, hard security issues, because it is the topical one. I found some similarities, mainly in terms of Russian and Chinese doctrine and Russian and Chinese strategy. Both countries are pretty aware of before the war, are pretty aware of some limits. By the way, in terms of sea power, China is still literal sea power, not blue water navy, right? So being aware of the limitations, both of them applied in their doctrine what I would call a limited warfare. Limited warfare that put weight on initial stage of the conflict. So the aim is to very quickly deploy forces and very rapidly mobilize all the status apparatus and to inflict the strategic shock to the enemy right at the very beginning of the conflict, with the aim to enforce negotiations, both with the enemy as well as its potential alliance that would come to help. So Russians were training this vis-a-vis Baltic states, right? But as I said, both of them have this in doctrine, and they adjusted a strategy to it. So the strategy is to conquer part of the territory, to cover the territory with a system that is called anti-access area denial system. That means mainly air defense, long precision fire, massive artillery, electronic warfare, in order to forestall some, let's say, liberation operation by the allies of the opponent. So sometimes this strategy is called fait accompli, but the strategy failed in Ukraine. Why I found it was important for NATO and for us, because the capabilities needed to counter this fait accompli strategy are relevant one, regardless of the land, when it concerns the land warfare or the maritime. So you need to have the ability to very quickly disrupt this A2AD anti-access area denial umbrella and to penetrate actually this. And it is interesting what we see, for instance, in Ukrainian attack in Sevastopol or Novorossiysk. This was actually the application of combination of unmanned vehicles, area vehicles, together with unmanned vessels. This is precisely about disrupting the A2AD umbrella, and also United States providing Ukraine with anti-air defense missiles. So missiles that are capable to disrupt air defense. So this is, let's say, we see already the preparation in terms of capabilities for the future conflict, maybe with China in the Ukraine. And second, why I deem it relevant for our region, that I said that, and this is something has in common what you have said, that Interest of the United States is that Europe is safe and that European forces within NATO, European pillar of NATO, is capable to take care of its security itself in order to allow some alliance led by United States to counter the Chinese threat. And it still applies today, and it should be, in US eyes, the result of this war, actually. So before the war, I made this comparative analysis. Now, I think during the war, or after the war, it is important to focus on what kind of lesson China will take from this war. And it is also important for our region because it will be not only Russia and China that will take a very useful lesson from this war. It will be any other adversary that is watching and taking a lesson. So what I said, we need to have a, let's say, empathy-driven strategic thinking. So focus on the lessons of our adversaries. Most relevant one, though, is the Chinese one, because they have capabilities, they have money, and they have a resolve. So looking on the Chinese adoption based on the lessons from the war will be relevant also for us to figure out what any other adversary may learn from this war. Because what actually China so far trained vis-a-vis Taiwan, with all this amphibious operation and so on and so forth, it very much resembles the first week of the Russian campaign in the Ukraine. But as I said, it failed. So therefore, China will adjust. And because China will adjust, United States need to adjust. And the United States has been already focusing for 5 years to China. So that means Chinese adjustment will influence also US defense planning. And it will influence also the expectation of United States from its NATO allies, European allies. Therefore, it's important for us. But not going into the details in terms of capabilities, we can later on discuss it. I would like now to concentrate what are the lessons, what are the political lessons of China, or the strategic lesson. And the strategic lessons are political ones, because we all learned, as well as China learned, then if in times of crisis, it is not the defense ministers, it is not the chief of general staff, it is not the chief of intelligence who decide about using a weapon or increasing deterrence. It is politicians. Politicians who are decisive one, not the military expert. And they have two concrete phenomenon that they registered during the war now, I think. One was that there is overall reluctance of the decision makers to take risks. I see it also. I spent 20 years in diplomatic service. Last 5 years, I'm political advisor. So I had experience how the politicians are thinking. So there is, and you see it also in case of Ukraine war. We can later to explain it, because I was was in favor of having, let's say, more involvement right at the beginning when Mariupol was, destroyed and so on and so forth. But decision makers are dependent on public support, which nowadays can be measured very quickly, almost immediately on social media. And this leads very concretely, and this is my concrete experience, to the situation that today media advisors, media experts, spin doctors, or marketers are more relevant for the decision makers than security experts or intelligence officers, right? So, because they are establishing what is politically risky and what is not risky. So this was a concrete sign, and it will have an influence on Chinese learning from this war, because they are watching us. Second one is that Second lesson is that using robust military power, regardless whether land or maritime, heavy armored brigades, strong firepower, amphibious vessels, is not going to bring results if the military objective is not adjusted and harmonized with political goal. This was the failure at the very beginning. Political goal was not harmonized with some military objectives. And if it's not adjusted also to moral and behavior of the opponent, not just the capabilities. So the conclusion is, from these two lessons that China and any other adversary took from this war, will be actually that any future adversary, regardless of China or any other, will, in my opinion, this is my thesis, will search for very different kind of operation, regardless whether kinetic or non-kinetic one. And the task of the military planners will be to initiate such a military contingency that still leave the dilemma for the opponent, for its political leadership, whether it is already worth fighting or not, whether to fight or not to fight. They will try to cause this dilemma, and this will be challenging our decision-making process at the very beginning of the conflict, not the military capabilities. So in the future, concretely, we might witness some, let's say, air blockade, naval blockade, quick assault with rapid withdrawal of the forces. Everything adjusted well below Article number 5 threshold, or below the threshold that would trigger a war in case of Taiwan, right? So, and I think this applies also to China, regardless of its now massive armament and massive investment to weaponry. So my thesis is that regardless that they have a budget in some categories like maybe battle tanks, they are already exceeding the United States. It is not for sure that they will use this military power for such an attack. They might, but nothing as is given yet. Even though if you look at this, Xi Jinping, when he spoke about the army should be ready 2027 to capable of conquer Taiwan, he, if I'm not wrong, he made this speech in the military committee. So this is should be understood as a kind of guidance for military preparation of the army. Military preparation of the army usually needs some guidance, but the decision would need to be taken in the Politburo of the party, right? Stable committee of the Politburo. I haven't registered any such a claim in the Politburo to be ready. So, as I said, it is not excluded, but we need to be aware what are the strategic interests of China. And they are different, and their thinking is different from the Russian one. So I think that their strategic interest up until now, what I see is first, coerce Taiwan, coerce to return to negotiating table on terms set by Beijing. And a second one is to blackmail the West in order to achieve some concessions. So these two interests are most relevant one for China. So concretely, they have different options than to launch attack. For instance, they have the possibility to adopt less costly blockade. They already tried, they have rehearsal after the visit of Nancy Pelosi. They conducted a live-fire military exercise around Taiwan that really blocked international waterways. So they have already some experience. And what is important that in the next 10 or 15 years, I think this will be beyond horizon of Xi. They have different option. Let's say they have possibility to have a long-term blockade of varying degree of intensity. You can envisage different level of blockades, right? For instance, they can start with some soft measures. They can require shipping goods entering Taiwan to pass through Chinese customs first, because they regard it as their territory, which would slow down Taiwan trade rather than disrupt it altogether. But nevertheless, which can prompt global companies to reconsider this route. They can also cut off Taiwan cables. You know, Taiwan network relies on 15 submarine cables because it's a very developed economy, and those data cables are very important and crucial one for the Taiwanese economy. And we saw already some precedent in 2011. It was a African island country, Mauritius, that was cut off from cables from unknown reasons, which led to completely blackout and blockade of this entire system. So such a developed economy like Taiwanese would probably not be satisfied with providing some star link from Elon Musk, right? So this is another possibility which would effectively mean an information blockade and data blockade of broken cables of Taiwan. They can also send some Coast Guard and surveillance boats to the Taiwan waters in order to search for merchant vessels, because they regard it as their territorial vessels, right? So they have different kind of possibilities with the aim to coerce Taiwan, because it will be connected with strangling Taiwanese economy, right? These free ports vis-a-vis China handle 90% of shipping of Taiwan. Taiwan coal mines and natural gas reserves are only sufficient for 39 days in case of coal mines and 11 days for gas reserves. Therefore, by the way, Taiwan invested heavily in renewables, but so far it did not reach the goal for having enough renewables. Such a blockade would have an impact on us. Again, the relevance for us, because Taiwan, as you know, is a major center of semiconductor production, and such a blockade would also hit the global economy. When the world cannot obtain chips produced in Taiwan nowadays, it will cause global interruptions within a weeks, not just in consumer electronics or technology products, but also in manufacturing products. China can also then maybe, let's say, escalate such a blockade as a prelude to war, because if they use really full-fledged blockade using mine submarines and surface ships, it will make the life very difficult for Taiwan, because it does not have any land routes for receiving a military aid, which has impact on, let's say, current already US planning, because they are also heavily investing in the capabilities to actually to move hardware in case of crisis. But on the other hand, and I'm coming to the second interest, if you recall, blackmailing the West. Using a blockade that I mentioned here is still not the entire safe option, because international law recognizes a blockade as an act of war. So it can escalate to war, which is actually the situation that China would like to avoid, because it's not certain that it would be ready to sustain such a war. So therefore, if we will see, so next time also some probe of blockade, like in case of Nancy Pelosi, or further armaments, and yeah, a different stage of this blockade, we need to have a, let's say, leadership that is able to have a cold blood assessment and not allow China to achieve the second goal, to blackmail us and to get unnecessary concessions. So we need to be also aware of the Chinese limitations. Not only the risking the war, but economic situations as well. Because without Taiwan's supply of also semiconductors and chips, China economy will soon also come to a standstill. You know, Taiwanese companies like Foxconn or Evergreen Marine employ a large number of Chinese. So the economic impact of the blockade far exceeds just then, let's say, blockade of semiconductors. So it is not that easy, and we need to be aware that regardless of the robust means, robust capabilities, there are also limitations for China in order not to be, as I said, blackmailed and to give too much concessions. So we need to have a clever deterrence, and this will require very good, let's say, employing experience, our Central European experience with gray zone tactics, because we know what is gray zone tactics is employed by Russian vis-a-vis us, you know, because probably gray zone tactics will be also accompanying to, let's say, some attempt to blockade Taiwan. And therefore, as I said, I see the connections. We should use our experience. And by the way, before the war, there has been for many years the question on the NATO eastern flank, however politically incorrect, but the question was there, whether our Western allies would really come and fight for us. If you go to the Baltic states, you would hear this question, that uncertainty whether they would come and fight. And actually, this is the same question about Taiwan. So, as I said, if we see, and okay, last 2 minutes. Yeah. As I said, pure military response to Chinese investment in armaments is not sufficient. We need to have a very capable decision makers. Do not recall that we have already historical precedents of blockade, right? A submarine blockade led United States to intervene in the First World War, which was very difficult political decision by President Wilson, but he did it. After the war, the West was exposed to Soviet blockade of Berlin, and Soviet that time in Europe was far more conventionally stronger than the Allies. And regardless, Eisenhower and the others risked and provided the airlift. In 1962, it was other way around when President Kennedy made a blockade of Taiwan and said any attempt to disrupt the blockade would cause a war. But the result of the Caribbean crisis, we see it was a success for the United States, because they achieved withdrawal of the missiles from Cuba, but they need to withdraw some missiles from Turkey and Italy. So what I want to say that in such a crisis, we need to have a very capable decision makers. But if you recall at the beginning, that they are not eager to take risks if they do not know that it will pay off politically for them. Therefore, we need, besides the very capable political leadership, we need also informed public. Informed public what it requires to keep our standard of living, to be aware that sometimes deterrence is very costly. because if we need to adjust to Chinese adjustment, it will be very costly. Deterrence is very costly. And we need to ask the public, are you ready to support your political leadership in case of crisis, even for reaching either for weapons or to increase massively deterrence, which will be very costly. So, and last but not least, what I see now is that all Europe, and I mean Western Europe, also provided a lot of solidarity with us. Yes, we cannot always claim, I mean, we Poles and Baltic states, we were right, and then finally the West provided us with solidarity. But the solidarity is not one-way street. So the solidarity that was given by our Western allies, recall what Portugal, Spain provided, Dutch, and so it will come to time when the solidarity will be required from us, by the United States or by our Western allies, let's say facing some security threat in Africa. So to sum up, we should be very precisely focusing on military buildup, but at the same time, we need to still keep cold blood strategic assessment, and we need to empathy-driven strategic thinking. Thank you.